In 1865, the United States abolished slavery. Then governments across the South began renting prisoners to private businesses. The system was called convict leasing. Prisoners mined coal, cut timber, fired bricks, laid railroad track, and worked on farms. They could not quit or bargain. In many camps, the company controlled their food, shelter, movement, punishment, and chances of survival. This was not slavery returning unchanged. Prisoners were held under criminal sentences not legally owned for life. But through criminal law, convict leasing restored slavery-like power over labor, and it targeted black Southerners most heavily. Start with the 13th Amendment. Congress passed it in January 1865, and the states ratified it that December. It prohibited slavery and involuntary servitude, with one exception: punishment for a crime after conviction. That exception did not create convict leasing. Officials and businesses chose what to build inside it. After emancipation, roughly 4 million formerly enslaved people claimed control of work, movement, family, and time. Former Confederate states answered with black codes. These laws restricted black freedom and made ordinary independence easier to criminalize. Vagrancy laws were especially powerful. A person without proof of employment could be arrested as idle or disorderly. Other laws punished labor contract disputes and minor offenses with severe fines. The words could appear race-neutral, while police and courts enforced them profoundly unequally. Congress challenged the black codes through the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and Reconstruction laws. Black citizens voted, held office, built institutions, and organized, but federal protection was incomplete. After Reconstruction ended in 1877, white-controlled Southern governments expanded segregation, disfranchisement, and coercive policing. An arrest could open a financial trap. A court imposed a short sentence, then added fines and court costs. If a defendant could not pay, hard labor time could grow. The state or county then leased the prisoner to a contractor. The company paid the government or took over the cost of confinement. Either way, a prisoner became a source of revenue. Related debt peonage laws tightened the trap. In Alabama, a worker who accepted an advance and then left a labor contract could be prosecuted for fraud. In 1911, the Supreme Court struck down that scheme in Bailey v. Alabama. The court looked past the law's label to its effect. Criminal punishment was being used to force a person to work off a private debt. The ruling mattered, but local coercion did not disappear simply because one statute fell. Georgia issued an early major lease in May 1868. 100 black prisoners sent to work for a railroad contractor. 16 died during that first year. Officials nevertheless saw lower prison costs and a path to income. Across the South, leases supplied railroads, farms, lumber and turpentine camps, brickworks, ironworks, and coal mines. Arrangements varied. Some states concentrated prisoners under a few large companies. Counties made smaller deals of their own. The racial pattern was unmistakable. In Alabama's mature system, 90% of state prisoners and more than 95% of county prisoners were African American. Poor white prisoners were also leased. Women and children endured forced prison labor, too. But discriminatory enforcement made black people the principal targets. The contractor's incentive was especially dangerous. An enslaver claimed a person as valuable property for life. A lessee controlled a prisoner for a limited term and could often obtain a replacement. That did not make slavery humane. It made leased workers unusually disposable. Food, clothing, sanitation, and medical care were routinely inadequate. Whipping and other torture enforced work. Disease, exhaustion, mine collapses, and explosions killed prisoners far from home. Inspectors existed, but oversight was often weak or compromised. In Alabama, officials even graded prisoners by strength and skill, charging companies different rates for different bodies. Ledgers turned captivity into accounting. Lease payments in one column, food and guards in another. For companies, prisoners offered something free workers did not: a workforce that could not strike, leave, or demand safer conditions. For governments, leasing converted incarceration from an expense into income. Alabama's treasury became deeply dependent on the payments. That alliance helped build the so-called New South. Coal-fed furnaces, iron and steel production expanded. Railroads crossed the region. Behind the language of progress stood people driven underground and into camps by courts, chains, and unpaid fees. Free workers felt the pressure, too. Employers used captive labor to resist wage demands and keep production moving during disputes. In Tennessee's Coal Creek conflict, miners rebelled against the use of leased prisoners. Opposition to leasing, however, did not always mean support for racial equality. Resistance also came from prisoners and black communities. Prisoners escaped, slowed work, reported abuse, and sometimes fought back. Black journalists, ministers, women's organizations, labor advocates, and reformers exposed camp conditions. Investigations repeatedly confirmed brutality. But reform collided with corporate power, racist politics, and governments dependent on revenue. On April 8, 1911, an explosion tore through Alabama's Banner Mine and killed 128 workers. 125 were convict laborers, almost all black. The disaster helped an abolition bill pass Alabama's House. The bill died in the state Senate. Leasing continued. Georgia had outlawed private leasing in 1908. Other states ended it at different times. But abolition often changed the manager, not the coercion. Prisoners were moved to public road gangs, prison farms, and government-run mines. Alabama ended private convict leasing on June 30, 1928, the last state to do so, 63 years after ratification of the 13th Amendment. There is no clean end date for coerced prison labor. Private leases overlapped with chain gangs, state farms, and debt peonage. In 1941, the Justice Department finally told federal prosecutors to pursue involuntary servitude cases even when they could not prove a debt. The legal difference from slavery mattered. Prisoners had formal sentences and could, in principle, return to freedom. The comparison also matters. Captive labor was transferred, disciplined, and exploited under overwhelmingly white control. The system grew from slavery's aftermath and helped preserve a racial hierarchy through law. Convict leasing was not an accidental failure at the edge of Reconstruction. It linked courthouses, state treasuries, and major industries. Its products entered ordinary life as tracks, roads, coal, iron, lumber, and bricks. Its costs entered families as disappearance, injury, lost income, fear, and unmarked graves. This history does not require treating every arrest as false or every white Southerner as identical. It requires following the documented decisions: which laws were written, which arrests were pursued, which contracts were signed, and which warnings were ignored. The Civil War destroyed legal chattel slavery. But for tens of thousands pulled into convict leasing, freedom failed in courtrooms, budgets, and workplaces. Their history is a warning. Emancipation on paper can be undermined when punishment becomes a market and people become revenue.